Live? I think we're live. Go, it said. So, can fish help feed 9 billion people? Since the vast ocean defies boundaries, who's responsible for its care? What does ocean health mean to the health of coastal, tribal, First Nation communities? Thank you, everyone on the internet, whoever you are, for joining us today for this online panel to really think about how we can manage the complexities of our ocean in the Anthropocene. I guess where I'd like to start is first having our panelists introduce themselves. And so why don't we start with my collaborator and colleague on the book. Wait, I'm going to show this book. Conservation for the Anthropocene Ocean, Melissa Poe. So Melissa, why don't you introduce yourself?
Good morning, I'm Melissa Poe, and I'm an environmental anthropologist. I work at Washington Sea Grant, which is a department at the University of Washington. And I'm also a social scientist at NOAA's Northwest Fisheries Science Center. I get to focus some of my research and tools on thinking about social and cultural ties to a variety of ecosystems. And I'm really glad to have you all join and look forward to this conversation.
Thanks, Melissa. Eddy, who are you?
Hi, I'm Eddy Allison. I'm a professor at the University of Washington in the School of Marine and Environmental Affairs. And I call myself a student of the fisheries because I've studied fisheries for, well, almost 30 years now. And I study fisheries from all kinds of perspectives, but often working with fishing communities, fishery managers, fishery policymakers as well. And I work in international development on issues like food security, poverty reduction, adaptation to climate change. A lot of my work has been in sub-Saharan Africa, Asia, Pacific, a little bit in Latin America, pretty much everywhere. I think I've worked on all 6 inhabited continents, but always with fishing communities around people's relationship with the sea.
Thanks, Eddy. Thanks for joining us today, especially since you're over in Europe right now. And Katy, who are you? Katy, I think the internet would be really happy to hear you without muting.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. My name is Katy Arkema, and I'm a lead scientist with the Natural Capital Project. And the Natural Capital Project is a group of interdisciplinary scientists that are developing different approaches and tools to using information about the benefits that nature provides to people to inform a whole suite of different development, conservation, and management decisions. And in my research, I work on the ground in lots of locations around the world with different practitioners and managers to design the kind of science that we need to inform a whole suite of different decisions to achieve a more sustainable future.
Thanks, Katy. And Jenna?
Hi, thanks everyone for joining. I'm Jenna Sullivan. I'm a graduate student, PhD student in Dr. Bruce Mengi and Jane Lubchenko's lab at Oregon State University. So our lab studies species that live on the shore on the Oregon coast and how they interact with each other and how they interact with their environment. So we are a community ecology lab. I've also been working a lot with Jane Lubchenko on her efforts to enhance public engagement with sciences and connect use-inspired and actionable science with policymakers and managers. So that's been really valuable part of my training. My PhD research is on sea star wasting disease, which is this big epidemic of starfish dying on the West Coast, which has been kind of a sad but also very interesting thing to work on.
Great, thanks, Jenna. Thanks for joining us today. And Terry?
Thanks, Phil and Melissa and everyone here. I'm Terry Satterfield. I am an interdisciplinary social scientist, and I'm a professor of culture, risk, and the environment at the University of British Columbia. We have an Institute for Resources, Environment, and Sustainability, which is a large graduate program. I'm soon to be outgoing director of that. And in general, I study natural resource controversies, culture and cultural ecosystem services, perceived risks and problems of valuation, especially things that conventionally get ignored, undervalued, or are considered unvaluable or invaluable in natural resource management contexts.
Great, thanks, Terry, and welcome.
Thanks.
My name is Phil Levin, and I will be sort of moderating the event today. I am the lead scientist for the Nature Conservancy in Washington, and also a professor of practice at the University of Washington in the School of Environmental and Forest Sciences. And thanks everybody out there for joining us today. I guess where I sort of feel like we should start is getting down to the idea, well, what is the Anthropocene? What is the Anthropocene ocean, and why do we need conservation that's any different in the Anthropocene than we do, in any other scene? Melissa, maybe you have some thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'll take a stab and welcome other contributions to how to think about the Anthropocene and what conservation for the ocean means. Just on a general level, the idea of the Anthropocene is something that has now been accepted very broadly about the current era we are in. Over the past 10,000 years or so, we were in an era that was referred to as the Holocene, and perhaps we passed a certain kind of tipping point. We're not sure exactly when that tipping point and threshold was crossed, but it's now widely recognized that Earth's systems have changed fundamentally as a result of human activities. And so these signatures from our human activities have influenced the way soils behave, the transformation of species migrations in the ocean, population changes for other animals in the ocean, but also chemistry. And we have come to recognize this as a human influenced, perhaps even human dominated Earth system. I think by embracing this concept of Anthropocene, and specifically Anthropocene ocean, so the influences that people have on the ocean, it opens up for our thinking in conservation a recognition that people are part of the system. These are social ecological systems. But I think that poses for us new challenges around how are we going to survive in these new systems, especially if there's a lot of uncertainty about how processes and evolutionary outcomes might unfold. So we're faced with a whole bunch of new uncertain kinds of questions, but I think in addition to just simply asking how will we, and this is a big, grand, broad we, I mean we as all beings that enjoy Earth as a home, that is our fellow individual people, but also other plants and animals and organisms. Not only how will we survive, but how will we thrive and live together? So I think that has a lot of implications, opportunities, and new kinds of thinking for conservation.
Thanks, Melissa. And it's interesting you mentioned the grand we of the Anthropocene, and it kind of reminds me of some of Katy's work. Well, a lot of Katy's work actually, where I think Katy, you've thought about the grand we in a really interesting way in a lot of your work. I'm thinking in the Bahamas or Belize or other beautiful tropical places. And I'm wondering if you could talk about the ways you think about transdisciplinary science. What is it? Why do we need it in the Anthropocene? How do we define these problems in the age of the grand we?
Yeah, well, so just starting out with that, what is that term, transdisciplinary? Um, and it at first I think sounds like a mouthful of jargon, and I think makes people think, well, okay, how's that different than interdisciplinary? And from my experience in real places, working with real people, and in the literature, that distinction from interdisciplinary really relates to that grand we. And it relates in the sense that transdisciplinary isn't just about integrating among multiple different disciplines, but it's actually about approaching science in a way that crosses societal and scientific boundaries, so that that grand we is both about how do scientists approach problems, and what are the sort of interesting scientific, sort of fundamental scientific problems, and how can those intersect with the things that society finds really valuable and really important, and the societal definition of problems. And so just to get a little bit more specific, in some of our work, especially in small island developing states in the Caribbean and elsewhere, some of these problems come into really stark relief. And that's because these are places where people have a very close connection in terms of their livelihood, their sort of cultural heritage, their daily activities with the ocean. And they have this usually pretty strong intuitive sense about what the ocean means to them. And the ocean, like Melissa was saying, in terms of not just people doing activities in the ocean, but the animals and the plants and the species that live there. They usually have this good intuitive sense about it, but it's really hard to understand how will the decisions that they're making now, whether those are personal decisions or sort of national level development decisions, how are those going to affect the things that they care about in the future? I think that's where science and society can kind of intersect in terms of these challenging problems that we need to tackle. And we can do that around better understanding not just the impacts that people have on ecosystems through their activities, but also the ways in which ecosystems in turn benefit people. And we can start to push the envelope so that we're the sort of research envelope, so we're getting a better sense of really these human well-being outcomes and sort of impacts to people and nature of the decisions that we're making. So yeah, we've been doing that in several different development planning contexts on these islands.
Thanks, Katy. You know, as you were talking and thinking, this sort of notion of science and society working together to solve problems, that kind of raises a lot of issues for me. And one of the things I think about is, well, you know, people need food. People need to eat. And there's going to be 9 billion people. Seafood's important to a lot of people. And Eddy, I'm wondering, I mean, do you really think people should be eating fish? All we hear about is how overfishing is causing all sorts of problems. Maybe people should just stop eating fish. Eddy?
Well,
or, go ahead.
Can I say one thing and then I'll hand it over to Eddy, because this is definitely his shtick. But I have to say, I just came back from the Bahamas last week, and I was just sort of like feeling torn the entire time around the conch fishery there. And the fact that it is such an icon for that, and sort of iconic species for that country. And it is really sort of appears to be on the edge of a tipping point. And coming from a sort of human development goal side of things, I constantly wanted more engagement with the fishermen and the communities there to understand what they need. But at the same time, that was really challenging the ecological side of me, where I just wanted to be snorkeling around looking at these beautiful animals, and it was just devastating how few there were.
Yeah.
I'll hand it over to you, Eddy.
Thanks, Katie and Phil. It's a good question, and I think starting with the grand we that Phil was talking about earlier, and then also thinking about Katie's very specific recent experience with a particular fishery in a particular place, I think illustrates the impossibility of answering the question for everybody. It's going to be very, very dependent on where you are and which circumstances. The whole of the world doesn't have to eat more fish. If you're a vegetarian and you live in a developed country like the US or Canada, you're probably getting loads of choice of good, nutritious food, and you can manage fine without eating any fish, let alone more fish. Some people in the world, however, need fish to have a nutritious and balanced diet, because culturally, fish is a preferred food. It's a healthy food, and getting the alternatives can be difficult and expensive. You can't just go along to a supermarket, a grocery store, a farmer's market, and have your choice of everything. Some small island developing states, even inland areas, like, I've worked a lot around the African Great Lakes. There are people there who depend a lot on fish, and fish adds all those nutrients that we get from everything from kale to chicken to a whole bunch of other things. They get a lot of it from fish, and so in those cases, protecting people's access to fish and ensuring that they have enough really does make the difference between a healthy childhood, a healthy subsequent life, or not. So yes, we need to keep using fish from both the oceans and our inland waters. And it really depends who is eating those fish, whether it's a priority. I mean, for many of us, you often hear protein. Fish are a great source of protein as the reason that we should eat fish. And the fact is that all of us in Western countries eat way more protein than we actually need. So we could do with just eating about half the quantity of protein that we need. And you can get all your protein from vegetables. If you eat a balanced diet full of protein-rich vegetables like beans and peas and things like that. So we don't need to eat fish. It's fine to keep eating fish if the supply remains sustainable. And one of the things that has really changed the quantity of fish available on global markets is the rise of aquaculture. And I know that many people in the US are a little bit sort of snobby about aquaculture, saying, oh, I insist on eating wild fish and I'm not going to eat farmed fish. The fact is that, if you eat shrimp, which is one of the US's preferred seafoods, you're already eating farmed seafood. Most shrimp is farmed. And it really is about drawing a balance from sources that you know to be sustainable. And there's a load of information available about sustainable fish now. So I think if you're eating from sustainable sources, you're eating in moderation, there's no reason to give up fish. And for your health, it can be beneficial. It's not essential for all of us, but Phil, you and I have reached the age where we're worried about heart health, and eating a couple of portions of small oily fish a week is going to lower the risk of coronary heart disease. So you and I should keep eating fish, and lots of other people in our position should as well. Expectant mothers should eat fish as well. Again, oily fish, rich in omega-3s, rich in other nutrients, can be good for child development, fetal development, child development. So yeah, I think people in general who enjoy fish and want it as part of a balanced diet should keep eating it and think carefully about sourcing.
Thanks, Eddy. It's really interesting. First, for the record, I'm young at heart, so I don't know how that plays into your assessment. So, it was interesting you're talking about, some people in the world need fish. They need fish for protein, they need fish for micronutrients, they need fish for nutrition. But I think Terry has quite a bit of experience working with people, First Nations, who need fish, but they need fish for perhaps other reasons. And I'm wondering, Terry, if you might comment about why do people need fish besides just straight food security?
Well, I wouldn't want to suggest that food security isn't pretty fundamental. So it is. So I just want to echo Katy and Eddy's points about that, especially in the childhood health and later adult health. And in BC anyway, where I've mostly worked in coastal communities, a lot of them live in essentially food deserts, in that the availability of options, even if the material means we're there to avail themselves of those, are extremely limited, and ever more so as ferry service and other things becomes more restricted. But I do think that people need fish for other reasons. I mean, a fundamental part for every First Nation that I have ever worked with and ever known up and down the coast and beyond, food is often the currency of identity. It is through the harvesting of food. It's through ceremonial practices linked to food in this part of the world, feasting and potlatching, where all cultural business takes place, where relationships are built. It's the medium through which knowledge is passed on. Important historical sites, because they're often also harvesting sites. I mean, there's so much that goes on that is, you could say, immaterial, although I put that in quotes, that is attached to food. Food is literally the stuff of cultural life and the stuff of identity. So I just think it's hugely important, and it's especially important in the kind of, with the legacy of colonialism and the dispossession of access to food, marine foods, terrestrial foods that occurred there. It's that, it's historically a very thorny topic. And so maintaining and reintroducing and continuity around food practices is just a huge piece of that post-colonial puzzle and health and well-being.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's if we come down from each of our different perspectives on this idea that, we're engaged with, we're connected with the ocean for food, for our cultures, for our livelihoods, for recreation, for lots of different reasons. That means we're going to use the ocean. And I guess at the Nature Conservancy, we would like science to guide us forward on a path of sustainability. And Jenna, I know that you've been thinking a lot about sort of this idea that we have, information overload and confusion, and there's a mistrust of science. And I'm wondering, how do you think that scientists, particularly of the future, you're the future. Eddy already said I was old. So how can scientists gain trust? How can scientists help working with communities to craft evidence-based policies that protect cultures, that protect livelihoods, that protect the environment? Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah. I think recent events have sort of shocked a lot of scientists and a lot of us into realizing that the ivory tower model doesn't work, where scientists just talk to each other, maybe, are interdisciplinary but not transdisciplinary. They're just saying in their journals and talking to each other in a bubble. Instead, we need to start integrating into society and really becoming part of society and understanding the wants and needs of society, to really help protect both the environment that a lot of us care about and the people that we all care about. So, people are realizing and have been realizing that the information deficit model isn't what's going on. So if somebody isn't on the same page as you, just giving them more facts and more questionable facts isn't going to change their mind. So a lot of what seems to actually be working, engaging with public and with policymakers and managers, with a relationship that's based on mutual respect. So scientists aren't coming in to with outreach, and instead they're focusing on engagement and having a two-way conversation. And acknowledging that these relationships will take time to build. So an enduring and long-lasting relationship between a scientist and, say, a policymaker is what's going to make that policymaker look to the scientists when they need to make a decision and help make that policy decision based on good, sound science. In our chapter in the book, we quoted Admiral Thad Allen, who was the National Incidents Commander after the Deepwater Horizon oil spill, and he said, "A crisis is not a time to start exchanging business cards." So if you don't have these relationships built already and all of a sudden something happens, in my case, for my PhD research, seastar wasting, for example, happens, and all of a sudden everyone's like, oh no, what are we gonna do? And these relationships, if they aren't built already, this is a good time to start building them for everyone. And not only thinking about who to talk to, and treating them with respect and listening to what they have to say, but talking in a way that actually makes sense, using plain language, avoiding the jargon of your specific field, and showing that scientists are people too. We have families and we care about having healthy oceans and food for everyone, and we have a warm, caring side. So I think there's a lot of great things going on social media with, this is what a scientist looks like kind of stuff. So yeah, it seems like we're doing a good job, and those are just some things I've been thinking about.
Yeah, thanks. I should say, and I can't see the YouTube thing to the world. Dear world, if you have any questions or comments for our panel, please go ahead and you can put them in the YouTube comment thing, and they will somehow magically get transferred to me, but I don't know how. So Jenna, just to follow up on what you were talking about, I guess, do you sort of feel like this relationship building is kind of the major stumbling block to progress in marine conservation, or do you see other sort of blocks between policy and science?
I definitely see, there's a lot of challenges to be overcome, and it's nice that, like, as a community, we're starting to think about not only what are the problems that we can identify and catalog like scientists very accurately and figure out everything that's going on, but also what are some successes that are working. But yeah, I absolutely think that the path forward is these relationships between all the different people that care about the ocean and just a healthy ecosystem in general. And really getting everyone on the same page. We all in the end have the same goals. So trying to figure out how as a community we can move forward since we have the same goals. So something like the recent ocean conference, the United Nations, those stakeholder side events, like uniting different user groups seems like the key, and building relationships between user groups. To say too on this topic.
Thanks. I guess one of the biggest threats that the oceans face, and we've talked a lot about fishing, the other would be climate change. I'm wondering, maybe from your different perspectives, how do we deal with climate change? How do we think about climate change? How will climate change affect cultures in the future and our relationships to the environment? Melissa, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's something I've been thinking about. So climate changes impact the ocean in many ways, and I'll just talk about some of those so that we can all kind of think about what these changes might look like. On the one hand, the seas are warming, and so these changes in ocean temperatures affect how phytoplankton might bloom in different areas, and those provide a cornerstone of food for other animals in the ocean. And so along with these different kinds of phytoplankton and their interactions with other zooplankton, so little tiny protein animals that feed fish and other marine mammals in the ocean, there also are warming temperatures have influenced outbreaks of what we think of as harmful algal blooms. So these are algae. Sorry, here, let me see if I can blank this out. Well, I don't know how to do that. Sorry about that. Algae that are sometimes harmful, maybe to seals, sea lions, and other animals who are eating shellfish like clams or crabs. And so they're affected, but it's also something that might impact people. And so we are faced increasingly with questions around whether or not it's healthy to eat our seafoods, like crabs that might be exposed to different kinds of domoic acid, or oysters that are influenced by different kinds of ocean temperature related biotoxins. And so that's just one aspect, but another is sea level rise. How are our coastlines changing and coastlines eroding? This might affect people who live next to the sea, and the majority of Earth's population is now living in coastal areas. And so as coasts erode and sea level rise, we really have to face some of these challenges. And finally, I just want to talk about in the polar caps and the ice caps. And so ice is melting at a rate that we've never seen before. That's really changing the dynamics of the ocean. And we're really trying to understand what those changes mean ecologically, but increasingly we're also seeing the impacts to people whose lives depend on Arctic regions and the polar regions. So, for example, some of the communities who live on the shores of the Arctic and the Chukchi and Bering Sea are dependent upon walrus and fish and seafood as a way of life. And as my colleagues on the panel have already noted, some of these places have you don't go to the grocery store and buy a package of mac and cheese to feed your family. You go to the ocean. The ocean is your table and your pantry for food, and not just because that's all there is to get by, but that is a way of life that has lasted millennia. So there are interactions around knowledge and how people live together with the ocean that are now fundamentally being transformed. So all of these, I think, are related to various kinds of climate changes. And I guess I'm going to close this comment and hear from others on the topic by just pointing out that although collectively our human activities that might be driven by, say, our fossil fuel emission activities and the kinds of pollution that we put in the air that might be absorbed by ocean, either in the form of temperatures or in the form of carbon that influences ocean chemistry, those things are kind of happening as an aggregate. As a whole, our consumption collectively is adding atmospherically to a system. But not all of us are consuming and emitting pollutants at the same degree. Some communities, cities, regions are benefiting and influencing and impacting the global environment more than others. So I just wanted to point out that this isn't equal everywhere, but at the same time, the effects and impacts and opportunities to influence change are also not equal. So I think it's important for us to keep in mind that there's a fair amount of inequality, both in the enjoyment of the benefits of the Anthropocene, but also in facing the impacts. And I think that those remain some of the challenges we also have to face.
Yeah, thanks, Melissa. You mentioned a couple things that I think others might have some thoughts on. One is maybe just extending a little bit the potential impacts of climate change on First Nations communities. Terry, do you have any thoughts that maybe extending a little bit of what Melissa was talking about? You're muted though.
Oh,
Yeah.
that little orange microphone. Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, I think Melissa did touch on those things, and I'm sure Katy, especially working with island nations, would have a lot to say too. On the coast here, there are parts of the coast where the impacts are not as severe as others, as concerns just the coastline itself, and so access to fishing sites and erosion of the shore. But with regard to temperature, ocean temperature, ocean acidification, the general move northward of certain species, I think that that effect is profound. I mean, it really is a blow to all of the marine economies up and down the coast, especially ones that have huge dependence on things like salmon, especially the more southern routes and runs. But for salmon, it's such an iconic species. I mean, it's really just completely heartbreaking. Of course, it's suffered from overfishing too, so it's not all attributable to climate change, but the impact of that blow in itself, really, I just think lots of people can't even begin to get their heads around that. And, you know, some species will become more abundant, some that are already prized, like halibut, but there'll also be the moving in of new things that are seen probably largely as predatory. But in that, food is not just food. Food is identity, it's cultural life, it's the ability to be the people that they are and have long been. Yeah, I think that that's truly mind-boggling. Like, it's right up there with colonialism on the impact that will have on communities up and down the coast, and marine communities especially everywhere.
Yeah, and I guess if extending Melissa's earlier comment, perhaps climate change is just another manifestation of colonialism. Katy, since you worked on sort of thinking about a lot with coastal protection, maybe switching topics and thinking about climate change in the context of island nations or the US or whatever, and thinking about, well, how do we and how do you at Natural Capital Project think about our shorelines and protecting our communities from the impacts of climate change?
Yeah, well, I was thinking about two things as Melissa and Terry were talking, and the first was sort of moving from impacts of climate-related stressors to what kinds of strategies do we have to adapt to a changing world. And then also, as Terry was saying, that we don't want those strategies to be just about kind of addressing those impacts, but also that they will still allow us to experience and like enjoy those aspects of our culture that we care about most. And so we think about this a lot at NatCap, and I do when I'm doing my work in terms of what are the sort of choices we can make that leave us the most room to adapt, and what do those look like, and what's the role that ecosystems can play in helping us to do that and helping us to maintain the kind of benefits that we care about into the future. So and it turns out that this is not something that just ecologists are thinking about these days. And this is where we get back into some of that transdisciplinary and interdisciplinary thinking, is that there's a lot of other people, ranging from engineers and coastal planners to even development banks, you know, that may have traditionally been focused on where do they site new infrastructure, be it roads or be it seawalls, who now are thinking about, okay, we're starting to see some of the negative impacts of this coastal infrastructure, the fact that it can actually close doors to options in the future. And so how can we do things like leave room for the river or room for the bay, and kind of foster things or make decisions around, say, having coastal parks and wetlands that can allow for letting water in spring tides run over an area, or, you know, how are we going to I'm thinking about the Inter-American Development Bank in particular, who has a project right now with the government of the Bahamas that's actually an investment project in mangrove restoration as opposed to seawalls in an area that was hit by the Hurricane Matthew from last year. So just kind of thinking ahead of time about, and again through work with communities and sort of in the local context, what are those suite of things that we care about that we don't want to have lost, and then now what are the strategies that we might be able to envision, and then what kind of predictive models can we use to try to figure out what will be the consequences for those benefits if we choose these different future directions.
Oops, cool. Thanks. So turning back to Eddy and some of the things you were talking about in the context of climate change, I mean, if we need to consider climate change and we need people to have food for their culture, for their nutrition, where should we prioritize? What part of the world do we need to really focus on in terms of dealing with this if food security and food sovereignty are ultimately our aims?
Yeah, well, you know, as bad as things are around, for example, our coasts in the Pacific Northwest with harmful algal blooms and species ranges moving and other things, we're actually better off than tropical latitudes. And if you look at projections that couple climate models with fish physiology and ecology and fishery science, then most of the predictions are that there will be a decrease in the production of tropical fish, and the peaks of fish production will move further towards the poles because the sort of thermal optima of where fish live will move away from the tropics. And if you look at where food insecurity, malnutrition is most acute, it is the countries around the tropics. So this is a real climate justice issue. The people who did least to cause climate change are the ones that are going to be affected most by it. And you know, there are potential gains in fisheries production potential in some areas adjacent to the countries that did most of the polluting and caused most of the climate change. So, you know, there is an injustice issue there. Similarly, if you have purchasing power, if you have wealth, then if you lose your local fish population, you can buy fish from somewhere else. If you don't have purchasing power and you rely a lot on the resources that are around you, then you don't have that option. So your options are fewer, and people move in order to try to secure livelihoods, in order to try to secure food, and we will see that. And you know, people are moving to go and fish and use marine resources in other places. And as we're trying to conserve the sea and vulnerable ecosystems like coral reefs, and people are sort of moving around trying to secure food as well, it makes conservation more challenging. It makes balancing people's food needs and you know, trying to maintain functional marine systems that support that food, again, more challenging. So, you know, those are the kinds of things that we have to plan for, and it is going to take an act of empathy, I think, on the part of those of us from wealthier countries to work with people in the countries that are most effective and have the fewest resources to address these issues, to you know, find workable solutions to this. And you know, there are things that you can do in terms of you know, fair trade to help people access food when they lose local supplies. There are aquaculture development investments that you can make. There are sort of changes that you can make in fisheries management. But all of this takes money and resources, and there is a global climate adaptation fund, where countries who have signed the Paris Agreement have pledged to contribute to help developing countries meet these adaptation challenges. And as a conservation community, we can point to the needs of ocean-dependent communities and ensure that ocean-dependent communities are included in those adaptation plans. But first and foremost, we have to support that fund. And the US withdrawing from the Paris Climate Agreement, or threatening to withdraw from it, is also withdrawing not just from the emissions agreements, but from pledged funding to the adaptation fund as well. So we need to look at our commitments to and our responsibilities in this arena.
Thanks, Eddy. As we're coming towards the end of our time, I was thinking as Melissa and I were editing the book, in some sense, sometimes conservation is kind of depressing. It's really easy to feel overwhelmed with all the problems. One of the things that really struck me about the book was how optimistic I felt reading everybody's chapters. People, like the people here on this panel, like you all, are thinking about things in an amazing way, forward thinking, and it really gives me great hope. And so I thought, Jenna, might ask you, being a grad student, and therefore part of the solution, are you optimistic? Am I just a naive old guy with apparently heart problems, according to Eddy, or is there something to be hopeful about?
I'm definitely optimistic. I had the great fortune of getting to go to the Smithsonian's Earth Optimism Summit earlier this year, and I was very optimistic. That just bolstered my excitement and optimism about people finding solutions all over the world and working together. Yeah, I think, it is a little bit, it's a rough time to be getting into science and conservation for a lot of reasons, but that I think is just really reinforcing among my peers in grad school and, early career scientists, the importance of really putting our best work forward. One thing that in my personal experience was really fun and exciting, so working with sea star wasting disease, it turns out everyone loves starfish since they were in second grade. Everyone cares. So I've really been able to, do a lot of communicating with people on the coast and in other places. Rogue Ales and Spirits, the brewery, collaborated with our lab to make this beer to raise awareness about sea star wasting, and people just got really into it. It's a good science and beer collaboration. There's a lot of creative things going on, and people are really, I think, wanting to learn more. The public is becoming more and more engaged, as far as I can tell. So yeah, I think there's lots of really creative collaborations that are just emerging. So it's really an exciting time to be starting out, I think.
I'm glad that you're starting out and almost done, right?
Yeah, almost done.
So we are coming towards the end of our time, and Melissa, I'll just turn to you to wrap things up in a minute or so. One of the themes that's really run through this, just with Jenna talking about a kid's relationship to a sea star, or people's relationships to the ocean in different ways, whether they're in the Bahamas or Africa or British Columbia. Do you have any final thoughts about just our relationship with the ocean in the Anthropocene and how we should move forward?
Yeah, we've talked a lot this morning about challenges and some tragedies that I think we all are increasingly aware of. And some of those tragedies, as Terry has reminded us, are echoing activities that have some roots that might be in our political relationships with one another, for example, colonialism. And Eddy has raised questions around the role that markets and access to wealth has played. I think whether we're thinking about policies or markets or science and other institutions as both, maybe at the root of some of the ways that we have found ourselves in this predicament and facing these challenges, perhaps those are also the areas where going forward we might pursue solutions. And in thinking about how people and nature are together in this shared Earth system, I think for me offers a very instructive place and inspiration for focusing on relationships that I've been thinking about as interconnectedness. Because at the end of the day, our shared health, people and ecosystems, I think, is on a path together. And what that means to me is that focusing on responsibilities and relationships are part of what this call of the conservation in the Anthropocene is posing to us. So I suppose just to wrap up in final remarks is I think of this as an interconnectedness, and on the one hand, I think that means people's relationships to different environments, but also to each other.
Okay, thank you, Melissa. And I see our time is just about up. I want to thank everybody across the world. I have no idea where you are, for tuning in. I hope it was interesting and useful. It's interesting, our book, Conservation for the Anthropocene Ocean by Academic Press, is available on Amazon and all your local bookstores. It's interesting because it is interdisciplinary. It does have everything in there from political science, anthropology, sociology, geography, lots of biology and ecology as well. And it sort of teaches us that to solve the problem that we're facing, we need everybody, all hands on deck. And I'm excited about the book and the contributors to the book because it's so broad and because it offers so many different perspectives of solutions. And for me, as I said before, it leaves me with a great deal of hope. So I will end there and just thank everybody for the panelists for spending an hour on the YouTube. And also thanks for your contributions to the books, and thanks to the other 20 odd authors. Well, actually it's like 20 odd lead authors, and I don't have 50 or 60 authors total. Do you know how many?
I think 67.
Cool, yeah.
Around.
So
plus or minus.
It was a large group effort. Okay, thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you, Phil.
Thank you, Phil, Melissa, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
I don't know what to do. It still says live. We're on live.